today I'm going to be talking about introduction to a new developer experience. This is kind of morphed from my symposium talk where I talked about developing with the engagement cloud. This presentation, I'm focusing more on CDP and Personalize. If you went to my presentation on engagement cloud, I only focused like a small sliver on Send, so I never really got a chance to dig into some of the stuff I talked about at Symposium. So hopefully we can dig a little deeper. I also added some slides from Symposium to this deck. So it's kind of a new deck with some of the stuff that they talked about and introduced at Symposium. So could be some useful stuff in there. So those that don't know who I am, I'm Dylan Young. I'm a developer advocate at Sitecore. My focus is on engagement cloud, but I would say probably 90% of that goes into CDP and Personalize. I will be doing some stuff coming up on Connect and more on Send as there's reasons to cover that. And then I've been at Sitecore now for about a year. Got basically about a month to go, and I'll be at a year. And I've been in the community for quite a long time. So I have some social links at the bottom if you want to email me, ask me questions. I would say it's not included there, but if you want to ask me questions, Slack is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I'm also now on Discord if you want to reach out to me there as well. If you have any questions specific, the CDP and Personalize is a channel for CDP and Personalize on Slack and on Discord. So I have it set to notify me even in the middle of the night. So if you have any questions, I usually will try to respond as soon as I have a chance to that. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to be introducing Engagement Cloud. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about CDP and Personalize, the different offerings, including XM Cloud with personalization. I'm going to throw that one in that I didn't talk about at Symposium. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of 3 through 7 or 3 through 6 is more the developer role when working with CDP and Personalize. So I'll be defining roles of what kind of roles a developer may be involved in when working with CDP and Personalize. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the current DevEx challenges that exist with the product today. And then I'm going to talk about a new DevEx approach that I created a proof of concept for my Symposium talk. And then I'm going to actually show a demo of that, which I didn't get a chance with the 25 minutes I had at Symposium to go through a demo. And if there's any time left, I'll obviously take questions and go from there. So we actually just saw this in the last presentation. So what is Engagement Cloud? We get these cool hexagon panels to represent the kind of composable story. All these products can go together or they cannot go together. So that's an option. You can mix Personalize with Content Hub 1 or et cetera in whatever composable stack that you want to come up with. But basically this represents all the SaaS products or the public cloud products that exist for Sitecore. And then they're broken up into clouds. The kind of bluish color is Content Cloud, Engagement Cloud is red, and we have a new product in there, which is Connect. Before that, obviously, Personalize, Send, CDP were a part of that. There are some products that aren't in this that are technically part of the Engagement Cloud. So analytics, at some point, I'm hoping to cover some content for Discover Sitecore about analytics and some of more advanced scenarios that you can do with that. MooseSend is also technically its own product. So Send and MooseSend are kind of the same thing, but they're right now today they're relatively the same thing, but over time they're going to morph and be more split apart of what they offer. Send more geared towards enterprise, whereas MooseSend's more geared towards large corporations or below potentially. And then we have the Commerce Cloud, which is Discover and Commerce. So let's talk about CDP and Personalize offerings. So I've stolen these slides, a lot of them, but it includes some new stuff from Amir and Derek's presentation at Sitecore Symposium. So they covered this really well. I don't know if I'll do it quite as well as they did, but so XM Cloud XM Cloud with personalization. So when you buy XM Cloud, you get a kind of a small sliver of personalization that comes in. It's great for the customers that was mentioned in the last presentation, for customers that are on XP, not really using all the XP features. Maybe they're using a small bit of personalization, maybe such as GUIP personalization or something like that. You get a lightweight version of Personalize with that, with XM Cloud, allowing you to do some forms of personalization, but not, it doesn't really have the full capabilities of Personalize. You don't have direct access to the tenant itself, the personalized tenant that kind of sits behind XM Cloud. So everything that you're working with XM Cloud is with the Pages interface, and you're able to create audience conditions based on templates that are non-customizable or able to be changed essentially with XM Cloud with personalization. So very limited, but really fits a specific type of customer that is not trying to do any advanced personalization. And then limited tracking and data retention. So the data retention is actually only 30 days. So it's really more about real-time collection of information and doing something, some sort of personalization with the limited rules that you have. There's limited guest information, limited events. So typically, if you know CDP very well, you get a lot more events that you can track. So with this, you only can really track few events. No order information, no identity, essentially. So it's a kind of I heard it used at the MVP Summit. It's like a 5% version of Personalize is the best way to kind of think about that. So then the next product is, so if you're on XM Cloud, you want to do more, you want to do personalization potentially with decisioning, or you want to have custom audience templates for those roles that you're defining for XM Cloud, then you would upgrade to Personalize. This doesn't say that you have to have XM Cloud before this, so you could put Personalize with something else as well. It's standalone, accessible at app and then region.boxever, so app.eu. Well, EU doesn't exist as a region like that, but app.us.boxever.com, for example. It's probably the most likely upgrade scenario for XM Cloud. So most customers, I wouldn't say always will be in this case, but most customers just want to do more advanced personalization. So they would likely buy Personalize standalone and then basically set up more advanced personalization scenarios, either using decisioning in the tenant itself, or they're creating more audience templates for additional conditions that they're setting in Pages. The focus is still kind of on real-time actions, so experiences and experiments, the experimentation and decisioning. The data retention goes up from about, I think it's 30 days to about 90 days of data retention. So you're getting a little bit more. It's real time, but it's a little bit beyond real time. And you can start to collect from multiple sources as well with multiple different types of events. So you would use potentially the stream APIs to collect from mobile apps, things like that, to track view events, et cetera, beyond just the web application. With Personalize only, you don't have any access to batch APIs or interactive ingestion APIs, which are other APIs used by CDP. So then Sitecore CDP. So you could buy Sitecore Personalize, you could buy Sitecore CDP. That's actually a different, I have a different slide coming up next on that scenario, but you could go from XM Cloud to CDP and not add Personalize. You'd have the limited personalization scenarios that you have in XM Cloud with CDP to have the extended data tracking that you would have with CDP, but you wouldn't have the ability to add decisioning or advanced personalization scenarios. And you could also just have CDP by itself if you don't have XM Cloud. So if you wanted to just, there was actually quite a lot of questions about this at Symposium about just using CDP by itself. And, if you wanted to track all these different events, kind of collecting data across channels, across systems. And with CDP, you basically get full amount of data retention. So it's not just real time. It's I don't know what the limit is, like 5 years or something crazy, or even more than that you're able to collect on. The ingestion, you get the full set of APIs for ingesting guest data. So you get the batch APIs and the interactive APIs as well. So if you're importing XP customers or contacts from XP, you'd be using the batch APIs to import those typically. And I would say it's probably a more likely scenario that you would have XM Cloud or just Personalize, or XM Cloud and Personalize to upgrade to CDP. And then that's what the next slide is basically saying. And so the next slide is, if for those that have the partner sandbox, this is what this tenant is set up as, is that basically a CDP and a personalized tenant. And it's considered a Smart Hub CDP option or solution. It used to be its own product when I first started at Sitecore about a year ago, but now it's just considered a solution if you buy CDP and Personalize. And you take the slides of CDP and you take the slides of Personalize, and you basically get the best of both worlds. So you get the full decisioning engine, all the personalization, customizations, experimentation, and you pair that with just this crazy amounts of data retention, custom reporting. I didn't mention it, but guest segmentation, I forgot what the audience sync, all the capabilities of CDP paired with Personalize, basically all the things you want to do. So with that, I want to shift over to talking about a little bit about developer stuff related to these products. So I'm going to start talking about, if you were to buy a tenant, some of this kind of roles that you would see with this. So developer versus marketing tasks this is actually a debate we're having internally about what is developer versus marketing tasks, because this kind of comes into what we're going to be talking about tonight. So with when you buy a license of CDP and Personalize, you're going to get typically 2 tenants that are set up for your organization or for your customer, depending on what if you're a partner or a customer. One is UAT and one is production. And then in this process, once Sitecore sets this up for you, you're going to basically give developers access to these tenants, the 2 tenants. And so this is typically could be done by a developer, a marketer, or whoever wants to go through the process of just inviting people to the tenant. The next stage is, once you kind of have users in your 2 different tenants, it's kind of that initial stage of configuration of CDP and Personalize. There's a lot that goes into this, but I will say that I say it's developer focused, but it's kind of led by a marketer. So what should you track? What channels are you going to use? What kind of data you're going to ingest? And obviously this is also dependent on what product you bought. If you have only Personalized, you're not necessarily going to be collecting lots of data from other systems, but or you have limitations on that. But there's a lot of, once a marketer that's kind of helps define what's going to be some of the experiences or experiments that are going to be created, it becomes a very developer focused process. So there's initial setup of these tenants includes points of sale, connections, ingestion of data from multiple sources, potentially what kinds of data to ingest, and then also the configuration of library assets like templates, decision templates, audience templates, web experience templates, offer templates, all types of different templates. And so that's a very developer focused task. A lot of those things are things that a developer would be working on. And then it gets kind of, once that kind of initial configuration is done, you move into more customer delivery. This is where a marketer starts to take over. Once you have that initial configuration, you can start to create experiments or experiences using those kind of basic configuration. So I will say that it's mostly marketing driven at this point. However, as new use cases come up, maybe a marketer wants to create a new decision model based on some sort of new piece of guest profile information, then a developer has to come back into this to do this. So one thing I want to clarify with kind of calling all this out is that CDP and Personalize are definitely developer focused tools. They're not something that a marketer can just go out and start creating experiences without really configuring a lot of this stuff, ingesting data or creating these templates for the marketers, et cetera. And so that's why going into developer experiences is an important topic to talk about. So there's current developer experience challenges that exist today. So like I said, there's two tenets that you get. The biggest challenge is the fact that developers have to work directly with these tools. They might not be familiar with the tools is the first one of kind of the big challenges, but also there's two different tenets. So there's kind of that, how do you migrate stuff between the two tenets is kind of this big challenge. Today, a lot of that is copy and pasting. You take maybe you create a decision template, you'd have to kind of copy and paste that between your two different tenants. This is great for kind of a small team, or I wouldn't say it's great, but it's probably survivable in a small team, but there's just challenges with, there's no way to really do automated testing, or at least not easily in this approach. There's no peer review process. Developers can kind of step on each other potentially, or you could have your session in the tenant time out while you're trying to work on something. That actually happened to me a few times. And so you might lose your changes and then you have to go back and kind of repeat your process that you were doing. And then, like I said, there's no real easy way to migrate changes. And so if you have to do a manual process, I always found that, that's a greater chance for mistakes as you try to migrate those changes between tenants. So the new DevEx, this is a proof of concept that I came up with. It started out with just an idea that I had, but it's now starting to get community support, which is what I'm after. So everything I'm about to show is open source, and I'm always open to contributors that want to be interested in working on this. So first off, I want to talk about APIs because this is what enables the proof of concept that I worked on. So I talked a little bit while I was talking about CDP and Personalize about the ingestion APIs. Those are the ones you've probably seen, the stream, interactive, and batch APIs, well-known kind of APIs if you've gone through the certifications or whatnot. But I want to focus on these management APIs. So these are APIs that take place when you're logged into the tenant. You can actually open the network tab in Chrome, and you can actually see that there's APIs being called behind the scenes within the tenant to create connections or view connections, decision models, flows, templates, etc. I will say that these are not documented in official documentation today. There's a lot of discussion behind the scenes about trying to get those documented. But the kind of stance from Sitecore today is that because they're just used by the front end application, there isn't a reason to document them. But there is a push that as what I'm about to show, as that kind of gains traction, they will work on getting these better documented. So this is the approach, or this is what I dreamed up. And I thought was crazy when I first came up with it, but it seems like there's a lot of people interested in this. So it's moving away from using the tenants directly for a developer. It's moving into where they can basically use something like source control to do this. I have a bunch of icons on there that represent GitHub and Visual Studio Code, but those are interchangeable. You could use Azure DevOps for this. You could use Visual Studio instead. You could use Eclipse or whatever tools you want to use. But essentially, it would allow developers to use local source control, make their changes, commit those changes, and then with the API, is basically you're enabling a way to do CI/CD pipelines for this, so that as changes get into a dev branch, you could then push those out into a UAT tenant. Then as you do a testing in UAT, then you could merge release those out to a main branch to push them to production. This has some great advantages because now you have the ability to do unit testing locally on the JavaScript that you're writing for your tenant, and as well as you can create automation tests as well. Once you've deployed something out to a tenant, you can run some automation tests to make sure what you've written is got there okay, and then also make sure that it's working as expected. And I will say that some of the stuff in this slide, I haven't, those parts of the POC don't work today. Automation test is one, although I have a plan on how I'm going to do that, but I just haven't had a chance to do it yet. I have a very basic example of unit tests, but there's still more work that needs to be done there. So another option that this really opens up in the future is for partners, especially. I thought this was when I did the symposium presentation, I was hoping that a lot of partners would attend because this opens up the door for reusable frameworks, starter kits, accelerators, et cetera. You could have your own repository. Partner, for example, could have, they work with utility providers all the time, and they might have common web experience templates that they use or decision templates, whatever the case may be. And now they can create those in their own repository and then push them into specific tenants for their customers. And then potentially the community could build, a collection of web experience templates for the community that anybody can push into their, the respective tenants. A customer could be like, oh, I would be really cool to have those web experience templates. Let's push them into the my specific tenant. It's funny because the demo team has a lot of the assets that they use for their demo instances, the Play Summit. They're in source control, but they require a manual process today to deploy those into a specific tenant. So an example of this in the future with the demo team, for example, they do know about this project. They just haven't had a chance to implement anything, but in the future, they could just have an automated process to deploy these into their, as if you wanted to do a Play Summit demo with their specific use cases, you would just push those into a tenant without having to make mistakes as you try to copy and paste those over, which is the case today. So there's two open source repositories that kind of power this whole thing. There's a serializer tool, which is available as an NPM package today. It's a Node.js serializer command line tool. There's links there to the GitHub repository. There's also the links there to the NPM package. It's really the brains of the operation. It does the deploy stuff that I'll show here in a second. And it does some of the wrapping of the APIs so that you can, pull down or some of the actions that you would do with an API. The examples repository really just takes that previous slide where I showed the kind of the whole CI/CD process. It kind of shows, it has some example templates in there, and it basically represents with a GitHub workflow how you would use the serializer tool to deploy these things into a tenant. All right, demo time. Any questions so far? Guess not.
Many of them, but I don't want to interrupt and deviate. This can.
Not yet. All right, so I'll show the serializer tool first. I tried to increase this. So, I mean, inside the serializer tool, the source that exists today, this, like I said, is a brainsy operation. You don't necessarily, if you were trying to set this up for the first time and you wanted to just use this process and you didn't want to necessarily make customizations to the serializer, then you wouldn't need to come into this repository. You would just go and use your NPM, the NPM package for the serializer directly, and you would just reference it in the examples repository. That's how it's done. But if you were wanting to make contributions to this repository, I do have a list of issues for this repository that I provide in the link there, and I'll provide it a few more times. If you're interested in contributing, there's a bunch of ones that are easy to grab off the list. There is a few people that are assigned specific items right now as they're working on them, but if you're interested in building out more of this, because there's a lot of scenarios that this can do that I didn't talk about. Migration is one between tenants, having it automatically deploy stuff between the two. Different types of templates. I've only got it working with 3 templates today, which is audience, decision, and web templates. But there's other types of templates. I offer templates and creating offers or decision models or experiences or experiments. So if you're curious about extending this, really there's documentation. I think the team's been pretty good at documenting it. So there's a lot of documentation in the docs and commands section. And then there's just the source. There's the command section, which is all the different commands that you can run, which we'll cover here in a second. And then there's just utils that are used to power some of those commands behind the scenes. So I won't cover that too much, just because that might only matter to a few people that are very eager to play with it. But I'll show the examples one next. I don't know why I made it all full screen. So in here, there's a couple things of note. So this is a repository. I'll show this on GitHub real quick. The example. So this is a template repository. So if you want to go and start using this right away, you can just click this, use this template. And then it will just recreate this whole repository. And then you can essentially make the changes you want. I'm actually going to be using that tonight. I got a live demo one here, live demo serializer. And I've just recreated it based on that examples repository. So, and I've just changed some things so that it looks a little different on the partner sandbox, which is where I'm deploying this stuff to. So back to the examples repository real quick. Sorry, my dog's now playing with the toy behind me, so sorry for the squeaky noises. There's a couple of things that are important in here. First off is the artifacts folder. This is where all those templates live before. So the way the serializer works, there's a deploy command, and I'll walk through this in a second. There's a deploy command that picks up the artifacts folder. It's by default set to an artifacts folder, but you can change it to something else if you want. If you're running like an XM Cloud instance and you have a specific folder for your CDP artifacts, you could have a CDP artifacts folder or something like that. But it basically looks for a folder on your local file system that you specify, and then it will pick up all the templates from within that based on what we've currently got configured. So for example, templates, as of today, we only have 3 of these working: audience, decision, and web. So it would ignore offer templates for now, just because that's not a working scenario. But inside of these, there's actually a folder for each type of template that you're defining. And inside of that is a bunch of files. The way this works is when you deploy this, it will take what's in that folder and kind of package it all up into kind of a JSON payload, and then put it out into, it will use that API to, depending on the scenario, if it doesn't exist in the tenant, it will post it out and create a new version or new item. If it already exists and there's differences, then it will check if there's differences, and then if there is differences, it will push it out or do a put of putting it out there. The templates are different depending on the type. So audience, typically there's a config, which is just contains basic information. Really, this is just the JSON payload that's used for the APIs. I've just shortened it down with information it doesn't need to know, or you wouldn't need to know. Like you don't need to specify IDs and things like that in here, because the deploy app will just figure out those pieces for you. But things that you might want to specify is specified here. One thing that I found very cool is the ability to separate the JavaScript files that you write. When you write those in a tenant, when you call the APIs, you pass those in as a template element. But I was able to pull these out as separate files so that then you can write these in more of a natural interface for writing JavaScript. So these exist separately, but then when you run the deploy command, it just packages this up, sticks it in the template elements of the JSON payload and sends it off to the API, basically. And why that's useful is, another reason why that's useful is then you can start writing unit tests potentially. I don't have really good unit tests, but if you have a file.js here and you wanted to test this, you could write a file.spec. I'm using Mocha tests for this, but I never really took it all the way. I just have it returning true. But you could theoretically then write unit tests on those files that you're writing that you wouldn't usually be able to do if you were using a tenant directly. And yeah, another one to show is web templates. Web templates are more complex because there's so many different types of files that go in there. I have a regex that just looks for file and then a certain extension. So there's CSS, and then there's the free marker file, FTL, file.html, file.js, etc. And I also built it so you can, instead of JSON, it does YAML as well. So if you wanted to use YAML instead of JSON to write your configs, that's going to be done. So, okay, so from there, how are we doing on time? Are we doing good? Pretty good?
Yeah, I think
Right.
it's good, Dylan.
Okay, so I think next I want to show how to run some of the CLI commands. So I was going to skip this if we didn't have time for it, but so I have it installed on my local machine. I have the path set to the live demo folder that I'm going to be showing today. I just want to walk through some of the CLI commands. So, and kind of like if you worked with XM Cloud or you worked with the Sitecore CLI, they're similar, but not exact, because this is Node, not .NET Core CLI, but there's talk about doing a .NET Core CLI at some point. But so the first thing you need to do, if you're using this, is obviously authentication. You can't do really anything without that. So there is a login command, and I'm sharing, I mentioned this to Madhu to make sure we scrub the secret here. This is the partner sandbox. Hopefully no one uses this information that doesn't have access to a partner sandbox, but you'd basically pass in the ID, which is your client key from the sandbox, and you'd pass in the secret. And then you also pass in the location, which would basically determine which data center it is. And you run that command and it just authenticates it for you. It stores it in a special location that can be used for CI/CD as well. So once it's stored, then you can run other commands like status as an example. Although status just shows you your access token, it doesn't actually recheck if you're actually authenticated or not. There's no real good API for that. It'll also confirm that your service URL is api.boxever, just because we specify URL. So if you're curious which one you're using, then that's what it is. And then you can also log out if you, I don't know why you would do, but if you wanted to log out, you can run that as well. I don't really want to be logged out, so I'll re-authenticate. And then there's some things obviously I said it's kind of in its infancy of what needs to be built, but there's some other things that you can do. You can get a list of all templates from the tenant. And this is Partner Sandbox. So there's a lot of them. So there's like tons and tons of them. But I don't know what use case that fits, but that's just an example of what you do. And you can also pull by ID if you wanted to. Friendly ID is this friendly ID, or you can actually pull by the ref as well. It actually, the API behind it actually takes either or, and you just pass it in as friendly ID, and it will just return that specific. Now, the intention here is that all the APIs that are available to you from the tenant for these kind of management APIs would be handled here, but we've only got a certain few use cases. But the one I really want to show today is the deploy one. So this isn't an API specifically. There's no deploy API that's provided by the management APIs, but it's just a command that I've created. What this does, like I said, is it looks in the live demo, which is another folder here, or repository right here. And so I'm in this folder in the root right now in the command, the terminal over here. And so it's just looking at this artifacts folder. If I specified an artifacts path, then I could change it to something else, but it just, I only have two or two templates in here right now. I have one called Tooltip Pro and Live Demo Decision, very creative. And so if I run deploy, and you can run this from anywhere, even if you're local, then it will just go through that folder and pick up these pieces and deploy them out to the tenant. There's some messaging here that I think we need to work on, because I don't like the fact that this is red, but it's just saying that there's no audience template specified because I haven't created an audience kind of templates audience folder. There's none that I have for this. So let's jump over to, I know I'm going really fast, but I'm going to jump over to the Partner Sandbox. And so I have to verify my code real quick. All right, so in here, let me refresh real quick. Now, obviously, I was doing stuff earlier. So we have the Tooltip Pro. I have a tag called source control. It doesn't know that I'm deploying this from source control today. Eventually, tips to product about, maybe it detecting stuff is being deployed via source control so that you can, so that it can maybe behave differently. Because ideally what you'd want is you don't want marketers come in here and change these because they'd be overridden the next time there's deployment. So I've had discussions just about maybe if it's source controlled, then they're locked in some way from being edited in this interface. But you can see that the Tooltip Pro is here, and that's a web experience template. And then I had a decision template called Live Demo Decision, and it's just marked as source control. We're using client credentials to authenticate. So we're not using the tenant login of yourself. We're just using client credentials. And because of that, it shows up as unknown user. I don't know why, but that's just how it is. I have some others down here that I've done in the past that you may have seen in there from the initial tests I ran. So with that, I think what I want to do is to go through a full, where I'm going to make a change to the live demo project that I have. I'm going to make a simple change to it. And then we're going to, I'll basically follow it as it goes through CI/CD. And then we'll see what the changes are in here. And hopefully this goes all good. So I go to live demo. I'm basically going to change something in here. I can change all types of things. I can call this 2. And I'll do and then so I'll check this in. And we'll sync it, and then I'll quickly run over to this, and we should see that because we pushed that, should see. That's not, I just changed the wrong repository. Hold on one second. Oh, there we go. That took a little while. So because we pushed it, it's showing that there's a current action being done. So we can step into this. I didn't show the workflow, the GitHub workflow that was defined. I'll show it real quick in this interface. So basically it's doing a checkout, it's setting up Node, it's installing and running tests, although my tests don't really do anything yet. But this, if you had tests defined that block the build from happening, you could, prevent, bad changes from making it even into your tenant potentially. And then there's two commands here. There's authenticate to CDP. Personalize is the first one. So it's just running that command you saw me do a few seconds ago in the command line. Off login, ID, secret. These are stored as environment variables in GitHub. But if you were doing Azure DevOps, they could be stored as secrets that you would pull in as well there. And then there's a deploy, and all this really is doing again is running that serializer and deploy action. And then it just does all this in your CI/CD process. And so it says it's complete. And so we should be able to come back over here. And I don't remember which one I changed. Yeah. So you can see this is live, and it's actually changed the name as well. That's the first time I ever tried changing the name during a demo. So I'm glad to see that works as well. And so that's pretty much it for the live demo. Let me jump back to the deck real quick. Wrap up. And it's flipped again. Should stay unflipped. So just some links there that are helpful. Those are the repositories. I didn't mention it, but I have actually created a kind of a Swagger doc of those APIs that are hidden, that are not officially documented. It is very rough draft, that version of the Swagger doc. And it's unofficial. So at some point, Sitecore will document those APIs. And at that point, that would be the best place to go. But until then, we're kind of in this weird kind of middle state. And once this becomes a very popular tool, which I have a feeling it has based on current or what I've seen so far, then they'll document this. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more to this to come. I linked to developer portal because as I release videos, those usually show up there, as well as their social pushes and stuff, which, as I mentioned, the Discover Sitecore just released the video where I basically went through this exact process. So if you want to watch it again, I think there's going to be a recording of this, but there's also a recording of that that's probably slightly different than this. And I call out my blog because I've actually released other content similar to these APIs. Somebody asked a question in the CDP Personalized channel about how to restore something that was deleted in the past. So if you delete from the tenant, it will archive an experience or experiment. And there's actually a way with the APIs to recover that, whereas you can't do it from the tenant. So there's some extra power that you get by using these APIs. And so I think that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
I'm sending a lot of other questions, but yeah, the GitHub was the link I was looking forward for.
Great.
It's an interesting workflow that you're publishing a template directly to the developer workflow. And then I don't know how long we can safeguard that, but it's a very innovative experiment. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to play with it a little bit during this week.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in this. I would say it's a lot of interest even from the product leadership for CDP and Personalize. They talked a little bit about this at MVP Summit, but I think, there's a lot of initiative to improve the developer experience. For those that may not be aware, but BoxEver, when they were acquired, they didn't really have a developer community. Most of the stuff that was done by their services team.
Yes.
So they didn't really have some of these opportunities to, work out some of these issues or opportunities, I would say, of what can be done with the product with some of the APIs. So.
Yeah, the flavor of where the marketeer sits and kind of builds strategies and then goes ahead and uses the interfaces to deploy or maybe make business requirement based changes on the fly was the catchy part. Now there is a lot of developer interface. So a full stack developer kind of person who's on Sitecore knows everything, setups webs, and understands code, and that kind of person. You need unicorns to take this forward.
Well, hopefully in the future, they're trying to. I think they're starting to think about these use cases of marketer versus developer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say the challenges from the tool today is that even for the marketer, it might be too developer focused or too developer heavy for the marketer even.
Yes.
Kind of grasp the tool. So I think separating for developers will be great because the developers get the tools they want. And then by doing that, I think the marketers get a little bit more clearer separation. So
really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Great.
One question. During the symposium, we briefly touched about the feature offerings from Sitecore Personalize as a platform, and so the personalization, which is part of XM Cloud, as you mentioned in your slide, that is 5%, approximate 5% of feature. So a person who's like using just XM Cloud, not using a Sitecore Personalize, there are very limited features he would be able to use. And then the person who is using that XM Cloud and Personalize, not using CDP, do we have any metrics of comparison, like what all the features a person who is not using CDP and just using CDP Personalize? I know one of the topic which we talked about, a historical personalization. If a person is not using a CDP as a platform and just using Sitecore Personalize, and you mentioned that there are limitations where if you are just using Sitecore Personalize, there's maybe a 2 to 3 months of data which Sitecore Personalize will collect, and after that it's like wiped out. So do we have kind of a feature comparison between all these? Not sure with the XM Cloud only, but a feature comparison between Personalize and CDP.
So there is Ahmed Alamani, if I pronounce his last name correctly. He's the GTM kind of leader of Engagement Cloud. So he's kind of like my colleague as I work. He's more marketing focused. I'm more developer focused. He's got something that talks about CDP and Personalize and Smart Hub CDP, or the combination of the two, talking about those combinations and what kind of features you get versus the other features, etc. I'll see if I can dig up that link real quick. It's in the community blog form, so it's kind of hard to find sometimes. It doesn't always show up in search results either, so it's painful. I will say if you go to the developer portal, there's links to that as well. I will say as of today, there's not much that talks about XM Cloud with personalization versus the others. That was why I really was eager to add this to my slide, because at Symposium, I just talked about CDP Personalize and Smart Hub CDP. I do think there's going to be more content to come on what I say the 4 flavors of personalization. XM Cloud with personalization, Personalize, CDP, and Smart Hub CDP, basically.
That's good. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I might have a follow-up question on the same thing, Dylan. to talk about this during the symposium. So when you say XM Cloud having the personalized light version, is it like the 30-day retention period or is it a 90-day?
I believe it's 30-day. I've heard it a few times be 30, but I couldn't find it internal documentation is 30. So from my understanding, it is 30 days. And then after that, it's kind of, I don't know exactly how it would work, but I would assume it kind of slides off after that 30 days. Some of these XM Cloud with personalization, they're still, I mean, it's GA, but it's, going for the use cases of seeing, some of that in action. I am working on a presentation for Discover Sitecore where I'll show personalization for XM Cloud. Hopefully, some of those details will come out more in that. So.
And also, if we get just the personalized, is it 90 days or like without CDP? I'm asking.
I believe it's 90 days. And then CDP is pretty much infinite, or up to whatever limit they decide that I'm pretty sure it was 5 years, but I think it's even beyond that. Some of their larger customers has terabytes of data going way back. And it's great for the XP customers that are tired of managing XDB. And I know the challenges of having terabytes of XDB data. If you have CDP, you don't have to worry about that. Sitecore manages for you, basically.
That is one of the challenges which we are facing right now. And we have a disaster recovery environment as well, which is like kind of an active passive. And we have geodatabase application with all of the database being replicated on real time between the active and passive. So that is a lot of dollars to have, especially databases like Shard1 and Shard0 being real time replicated. So
yeah, it was really interesting because I worked at the booth at Symposium a couple times, and there was a lot of people complaining about XDB instances. I mean, I've been there as a consultant. XDB instances are pretty sometimes rare if they're working correctly. And so I do see the value of having something like CDP where you don't have to worry about, I mean, it's all handled for you. And I didn't touch on it, but if you wanted to do more advanced reporting with CDP, you have you can export that data and use something like Power BI to do custom reports and stuff like that. I'm hoping to cover a video on that hopefully soon, sometime in the future. So
yeah, and mainly the way my experience so far with all these XDB related instances those are a bit fragile. Like if there's one certificate missing, like the log files would be bombarded with the exceptions, and even if everything is working fine, there are a lot of exceptions being written. And when you reach out to Sitecore support, those are normal. You should not be worried about those and those. But my application insight and my logs is like so huge with those exceptions and so on and so forth. So
yeah, I've definitely been there. And it's not just that, it's like the SSL certs can expire, pretty often enough that you don't notice, and then you realize that your XDB has not been collecting data for quite some time, or the pool for reporting doesn't work, it fills up with data, and you have to figure out why it's not processing data. I think we've all been probably part of instances where it's like we come in, usually as MVPs, we're expected to be able to solve those, as experts. And some of those are really, really painful, because it does require a very unique set of skills to debug the reporting side of it as well as the data collection side of it. So.
So any other questions?
From us, thanks for that.
Problem.
We're running out of time. Maybe a last question to you, Dylan. From the community perspective, how can all the partners and our community can contribute to the example projects that you put together? What are the ways that we can help?
I think content would be great because I'm only one voice, and so anybody that wants to just play with these, there's been a developer from Exenium that's been contributing, as well as there's talk about doing some content. EPAM has had some interest as well. So I mean, I think it's really, they're both open source, so you know, there's ideas in there, but or issues, I guess, as were reported as, but I think, you know, there's a lot of potential for this. You know, like I said, there's, you know, an option for the community to create repositories for this. I haven't even gone down that rabbit hole yet. So, you know, somebody wants to start creating, you know, like a community set of web experience templates, that's an option as a way to contribute, build a example of this, as well as maybe contribute back to the serializer itself, and then create content on that as well. So
yeah, sounds great. Looking forward.
Yeah, I don't think there's many. I mean, I've been looking around. When I found out about these APIs, I kind of looked around to see if anybody was talking about them. I didn't see anybody talking about them. So, I mean, I think that was one of the kind of challenges with this, is that no one knew they existed, except for maybe some of the professional services team at Sitecore. But you know, now that I have the API spec for Swagger on that one link I sent, you can use it to kind of play with some of the APIs, or just open up the network tab when you're inside a CDP personalized tenant, the partner sandbox. You can just see them in action. And I've kind of collected them as I've tried to do different use cases.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dylan. It was amazing that you came up with this tool. Good to see that we are seeing the first demo live, I think, other than it's coming in the Discover channel.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's the video that came out today, but that came out like 5-10 minutes before this call. So not sure what created that timing, but other than that, no one really. I mean, I have a blog post about it, but I don't think anybody's read it yet, because that came out last week, and so it's just, you know, kind of new stuff. So
this is much better, Dylan, since you're
Thank
like
you,
one-on-one and
Thank
we can
you,
ask the
Dylan,
questions.
for spending your time, and thanks everybody for joining us.
absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Madhu and Bala.
Thank you.